that's really scary. And the other half of the country said, oh, that could never happen. Now we're all saying, she hit the nail right on the head, Anne. I'm really sorry that you were so right.
I know. Well, mobs, I mean, they are satanic. We'll always have them with us. What interested me about it, I wasn't sure if I could get a book out of it when I was first researching it. But I noticed I was always confused by those photos of, for example, the civil rights marchers and the little kids walking into the Little Rock school. And you'd see women standing there screaming angrily at the sweet-looking black kids walking into the school with Republican-provided federal guards. And it always confused me. Who are these people? And then I realized, why am I so confused? I have women screeching at me, yelling the C word, yelling hideous, awful, awful things, frequently when I show up to give a speech on a college campus and elsewhere. So I've seen these mobs myself. Why am I confused by this? And I realize it's because the people who write the history try to portray the women, the lunatics doing the screeching, as if it's like you and me and Phyllis Schlafly. Oh, no. The mobs always come from the left. Once you understand that, everything falls into place, both what I was writing about mostly at the time, because that was the evidence of it. I mean, we had the Occupy Wall Street, and you could read about the 1968 riots at the Democratic Convention in Chicago. There are uprisings now and then, always from the left. Every presidential assassination or attempted assassination has come from someone on the left. In fact, that's probably part of the reason JFK got shot. The FBI, federal authorities were looking for, that era's version of the Boogaloo Boys, the white supremacists. So they're shaking down all the right-wingers in Dallas, and they let, Lee Harvey Oswald go about unmolested. In fact, after the shooting, as happened with Jared Loughner in Arizona, the media, not as bad then, I suppose, as it is now, how could it be, but still pretty bad. For weeks, they kept trying to portray Lee Harvey Oswald, who had tried to immigrate to the Soviet Union, who passed out communist literature, who had tried to assassinate a very conservative general in Dallas. They tried to portray him as a right-winger, same way they did with Jared Loughner in Arizona. Okay, when one of our lefties, whom we have completely ignored and, in fact, nurtured, when he erupts and assassinates a president, we'll just rewrite the story and make him a right-winger. Well, now we're seeing much more violence. Well, not if you're reading the New York Times or watching any of the major media.
Those are peaceful protesters.
On social media, in places like Seattle, Portland, Chicago, all over. I mean, genuine mobs. And I recommend to all your listeners, cancel your cable subscriptions and go online. Follow Andy No and Second City Cop for the videos and local news. Local news tends to cover this stuff of what's actually happening. It's just been stunning to me watching these videos night after night of what's happening in Portland and Seattle and Chicago and elsewhere, but mostly those places. Just nonstop Antifa. You have the stormtroopers rioting, and I am telling you, Joyce, a viewer of MSNBC has no idea that it's not just placid Portland.
Yeah. No, listen, I'm listening to elected officials. I mean, the woman who stands in direct ascension of the presidency, God forbid anything happened to President Trump and Vice President Pence, calling federal police officers stormtroopers for trying to preserve federal buildings. I mean, it's almost
and even
as
if they're preserving state buildings. I mean, this is the reason we have, as I believe I described in Demonic, part of the reason that we are no longer, our country is no longer a mere confederation of states and became a national republic with a federal army, was to put down mobs. They realized this is, I mean, from the beginning, curiously, because we all adopted the name Tea Party, The Tea Party was not a big hit. The actual Tea Party was not a big hit with our founding fathers. Many were embarrassed. They reimbursed the India Tea Company. Paul Revere, replaced the lock. And by the way, all they did was throw the tea overboard to protest the taxes. There was no, vandalism or painting an anarchist A or randomly smashing Starbucks windows. Yet and still, our founding fathers were against it. It wasn't the Tea Party was not celebrated for another 50 years. Edmund Burke, our British champion, nearly turned against the American Revolution because of it. Our country is officially, studiously anti-mob, and it was a mob uprising with some revolutionary soldiers who thought they were being, overtaxed, or they weren't being paid, their farms were going under, and they started mobbing state officials. George Washington had to rally up an army to put down the mob. Mobs are dangerous to a democracy. Now, mobs are dangerous to anything. And to look at the history of the French Revolution, you will see this never ends well. Mobs have got to be smashed. They are always satanic. They are unthinking. They're childlike. They're moved by images and exhortations. It is, you can see the sort of primordial version of a mob just in your everyday Democrat politician, the way they don't really explain things. They like images. They turn the people they like, Obama, Clinton, Hillary, into just absolutely immutable heroes. They can do no wrong, and their enemies are always, worse than dirt. Whereas our side is always quite critical, both of the people on our side, and can acknowledge the good points of someone on the other side. It is a whole mob mentality that governs the left, so it's not much of a surprise that their children become mentally ill lunatics smashing down buildings.
Yeah, and that's why when you look at some of these scenes, as you point out, and you're saying, well, if this is about Black Lives Matter, why do all I see are white blonde girls from the suburbs and Tufts and Harvard, throwing rocks and yelling at black police officers? What has this got to do with anything that, Don Lemon is trying to tell me every night on television? Yeah, this stuff is crazy.
I think by now it's quite clear this has absolutely nothing to do with George Floyd. I mean, last weekend in Chicago, there were, I think, the chief of police said 57 shootings, 12 fatalities, all black. I'm sorry, I'm calling BS on anyone who pretends to care about black lives when they just turn a blind eye to that. Something else you won't hear about on MSNBC or read in the New York Times. Just the violence that's being set loose. And what the chief of police in Chicago said was, it's stunning how many guns they keep collecting. More than 90% of the shooting, or rather murders in Chicago, are done by guns. So they do need to take guns out of the hands of criminals. And he said, we can't do it because we need officers on the streets in these neighborhoods where the crime is taking place. But we have to take them off the streets where they need to be and move them to protect monuments because of these Antifa lunatics. I also think it's really striking how many of these people are mentally ill, the Antifa crowd, which the Democratic Party is totally fine with, which is why I have been sort of fat-shaming the big fat Antifa moms in Portland. It's not just for the joy of fat-shaming, which is fun in its own, but, come on. Women that fat, a big group of fat women, no, you have mental problems. And the Antifa boys, they are the reverse. It's weird. They're all skinny little wispy guys with their wispy beards. They all have that Jared Loughner stare when they get their mug shots taken. And half of them are transgender.
Listen, the one thing that I saw was you just had this Dallas police chief who happens to be a black female who arrested 700 people and hit them with charges for blocking a major highway. And she's totally unapologetic about it. But if it's not people like her stepping forward, or the Terry Crews of the world, or even the lunacy of a Kanye West, you never hear the other side of the story.
Yes, that's why you have to cut your cable subscription and go online as long as we're not all censored. I mean, a lot of Trump supporters are sure being deplatformed. Milo and Gavin McInnes and Laura Loomer. I mean, just so many of them. I assume we're all going to be thrown off the internet. They went after VDare, an immigration website. That's their big claim to fame. They agree with Trump on immigration. They're constantly being stripped of PayPal, network solutions. So I think they're going to come for all of us before the election. But as long as you can still get the truth online, that's where you find it. You're not seeing it on the news. It's really strange how MSNBC now reporting on federal troops being sent to Seattle as if it was some, peaceful little town someplace. And they go to the areas of town where Antifa is not and show people, walking along, going to cafes. Here we are in Portland. Here we are in Seattle. No, I'm simultaneously watching videos of Antifa smashing into federal buildings and these lunatics throwing projectiles. One of the things they did in Chicago, I guess this is common. I mean, it's so coordinated. It is very much like the French Revolution, but the signs they carry, the allegedly peaceful protesters, they carry signs on poles. And the poles are sharpened at the end so that they can be turned into swords to battle with the cops. When they got to a certain point close to where the monument was, you see just mobs of them stripping down into their all-black Antifa uniform, being protected, hidden by the, quote, peaceful protesters. The whole thing seems to have been coordinated with the allegedly peaceful protesters, as the chief of police implied. From the videos, you can see what's going on. It's like a military action against the police who are standing there mostly unprotected. They thought it was going to be a peaceful protest. Oh, boy, don't assume any peaceful protest is going to be peaceful these days, cops.
Let me ask you a question, Ann, because, of course, as I pointed out, the book Demonic, which she wrote years ago, really everyone has to read it. It was sitting on my shelf, and I saw an article somewhere that said, boy, is Ann Coulter prescient or what? So I picked up the book, and I reread it this weekend. And, I mean, it's stunning how you described exactly what I'm watching on my television set every night. But what happens in November? I mean, regardless, whether Donald Trump wins or loses, this mob is so out of control now. Is there, what happens in November?
I'm so mad at Trump right now. I'm not sure if this is optimism or pessimism, but the alternative is so much worse. I was pretty much convinced he was going to lose up until
no way.
Very, very recently. And it is 100% because of Antifa and BLM and the Democratic Party tying themselves at the hip to these. Now, I'm relieved that Trump has finally sent in federal troops. You don't get the benefit from the other side tying itself to lunatic mobs if you're not doing anything other than tweeting law and order. So I strongly salute him, and I hope he keeps sending the federal troops in, and I hope they are online and are going to gather them all up. But I've noticed I didn't tweet this because I thought people would think I was BSing, but I'm not BSing. I do have liberal friends, and a few of them visited me last weekend, and they hate Trump with the hot hate of 1,000 suns, absolutely did not vote for him in 2016. Both of them told me they are voting for Trump this year because of the Democratic Party being tied to this statue desecration, to these mobs rising up. And they just said, this is out of control. We still hate Trump, but there is no way we're voting for the Democrats. And they were telling me, no, Trump is definitely going to win because there are so many liberals like us. And, you know, we may not be out protesting, but he's doing something now. He's finally sent in the federal troops. And even though we think his second term will be a disaster, and then as for what happens if he wins, I kind of think, I mean, we'll see. This is the kind of prediction I'm not particularly good at, but I kind of feel like it will all, no matter what happens, the hysteria is going to die down, because the point of the hysteria right now is to cause Trump to lose re-election. If they don't do that, it's like, you know, the end of the Russia investigation. Nobody cares anymore. What's the point? He's got 4 years and then it's over.
I hope you're right. I'm frightened because I see the faces, as you point out, of these mobs and the absolute disregard for human life. And, you know, you were in Washington, as was I, after the inauguration, and those mobs were crazy, but they weren't as violent as what I see now. If you have the same amount of people on the streets of Washington as we did in 2017, in 2021, that city's going to burn to the ground.
Yes, I mean, that's part of what I describe in Demonic, that there is this. It was discovered by Gustave Le Bon, not surprisingly, a Frenchman, about 100 years after the French Revolution, probably a subject French people were very interested in after what the French Revolution did to their country. Did not bring democracy. It was just a disaster. But anyway, and he was the first one to describe this concept of groupthink and how people in a group will do things that they would never do on their own, never think of doing. But it becomes, the group itself becomes this, mobile monster, just engaging in wild, crazy acts of violence. And as I say, just looking at them and looking at the mugshots, you can see a good portion of them, even on their own, are meant to have massive mental problems.
Mm-hmm. Hey, that's why right now, sitting on my most read shelf, is George Orwell's 1984 and Ann Coulter's Demonic, along with other Ann Coulter books. But that one just really leaped out at me. If you don't own that book, you ought to. Is that book still available on Amazon?
I'm sure it is.
Yeah, you got to get the book because it's to the exact. It's just so prophetic. And I sat there and then I turned on the TV and there it was, right enacted in front of my eyes, exactly what you had predicted would happen with these mobs. And now that's my country. And I didn't even get to talk to you about DACA and foreign students, but we'll save that for another date.
Yes, we'll save that for another day once we've saved the country from these lunatics.
Good luck. Well, we're trying. Thanks so much, Ann. Miss you.
Good to talk to you, Joyce.
Bye-bye. All right, we got to take a break. We'll be right back.
The Ben Shapiro Show.
Capitalism is evil and capitalism is terrible, and the only solution to all of this is Marxism.
We will make America great again.